Every time they get a guy, they build him up, and you know what I do? And it's so crazy that Canelo is such a big star, but he's never been on pay-per-view unless he was on my undercard. But he's such a big star. He's such a big star, Oscar.
Hi, you're watching Dante Boxing Nation.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? I tell you all the time on this channel, just wait for it. Eventually, the truth will come to light. Everything you guys hear me say on my channel, it always comes to light. And as ironic as this is, a lot of times the truth that you guys hear me speak is repeated by the least expected person. In this case, it's Canelo Alvarez's own trainer. And this is not the first time that he maybe accidentally or intentionally spoke the truth that explained a lot of what has been taking place in Canelo Alvarez's career. So recently, Reynoso, Canelo Alvarez's trainer, he did an interview where he was asked about the Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson fight, comparing Shakur Stevenson to Floyd Mayweather. And he basically said in response that African-American fighters are very difficult to fight. I'm going to go ahead and play the clip for you guys and unpack all of this because there is a whole lot of unpacking to do on this one. Check out the clip.
Like you faced a fighter like Shakur before, somewhat similar to Mayweather style. Is there any resemblance, and does that fight prepare him at all? Like I know Shakur, she's starting out, but somewhat stylistically the same.
El estilo de Shakur como el de Floyd. En algún momento puesta alguna dificultad para enfrentar con el estilo de Valdez.
Sí, no, el estilo afroamericano para mí es de los más complicados que hay en el boxeo. Y cualquiera que vaya a pelear con un afroamericano con un estilo, creo que son peleas complicadas. Shakur es un tremendo boxeador.
It's a very good fight, difficult fight, like all the African fighters. And with Shakur, it will be no exception. It will be a good fight against Valdez.
Okay, so you heard it from the horse's mouth. Canelo Alvarez's own trainer admits that fighting, in his words, African-American fighters is very difficult. Meaning it's very difficult to beat them, right? First thing I want to say is, you guys remember a couple videos ago, I told you that when Canelo Alvarez says Demetrius Andrade is a horrible fighter, the translation is simple. That is too difficult of a fight to win. In fact, that's the exact word I used, was difficult. The same word that Canelo Alvarez's trainer just used right now. He just told on Canelo Alvarez. He just told on the whole team without even knowing that he did it. This is the reason why Canelo Alvarez has been avoiding the two undefeated black champions, Demetrius Andrade and Charlo, for 6 years. This is why the majority of Canelo Alvarez's opponents are not black, are white, or from Europe, even though Canelo Alvarez's next European opponent is a dangerous one, and it's a real challenge. There's no doubt about it. This is a huge upgrade in competition for Canelo Alvarez. But my point is, Canelo Alvarez's trainer, he just confirmed and completely corroborated what you always hear me say on my videos, which is apparently Canelo Alvarez, he chose the Bivol fight because he feels it's an easier fight than fighting against Jermall Charlo. Even though I thought because of Jermall Charlo's last performance, maybe Canelo would only look at that performance and say, this is the best time to get Charlo. He's coming off of a weak performance. Maybe he's going to look like that against me. Apparently that wasn't the case. And Canelo, he did look at this like, what if the same Charlo that beat Derevyanchenko shows up? What if the same Charlo that knocked out Julian J. Rock Williams shows up when I fight him? There were some people in the comment section that were saying, oh no, Dante, I don't believe that Canelo took the Bivol fight because he thinks it's easier than a Charlo or even a Benavidez fight. Well, guys, Canelo Alvarez's own trainer just said it out of his own mouth that they are taking the Bivol fight because fighting these black fighters like Jermall Charlo is a far more difficult fight to win. That is practically what Eddie Reynoso just said. And it's really interesting because Oscar De La Hoya's father, he did an interview a couple months back, and he had said that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding the African American fighters. He's avoiding the black fighters. This is what Oscar De La Hoya's father said, right? Now we hear Eddie Reynoso admit that he feels the black fighters are difficult. Like basically whenever you're fighting a black fighter, it's going to be a difficult fight. So if they feel this way about a fighter who's not even undefeated and has been knocked out before, like a Danny Jacobs, for example, or a James Kirkland, imagine how difficult they feel that a Andrade or a Charlo fight would be. More difficult than a Dimitri Bivol fight at 175, according to Canelo Alvarez's trainer. Another reason we know this is true, because it doesn't even logically make sense if you felt that, first of all, everyone has been calling for the Charlo fight for 6 years. There's been polls on the internet where I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people have voted asking, you know, who do you want to see Canelo Alvarez fight? And the fans overwhelmingly picked Jermall Charlo. But forget about Canelo fighting him now when the fans are asking for it. Remember, there was a time when both of the Charlo brothers were the champions at 154. Canelo was beltless. And the two Charlo brothers, the champions, were calling Canelo out. And Canelo did not want the fight. Demetrius Andrade was the champion at 154. Guess who his mandatory was? It was Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo Alvarez did not take the title shot that was offered to him from the champion. And Eddie Reynoso just explained why. Something else that's pretty revealing when you hear Eddie Reynoso say this. You know what this means, guys? It means this also destroys the whole Canelo Alvarez was too young when he fought Floyd Mayweather excuse. It completely destroys that. It exposes that as the lie that it was all along, the excuse it was all along. Because if Canelo felt that he was a better fighter years after he had lost to Floyd Mayweather, why wouldn't you take on the undefeated black fighters that you feel are difficult to beat? That's a rhetorical question, right? Wouldn't it seem to make more sense that you would go after those fighters just to show the world that, oh, you wasn't ready for Floyd. Now watch what I do to these undefeated black fighters. But that's not what Canelo did. Instead, after he lost to Floyd Mayweather and after he had his controversial decision over Lara, he decided to no longer fight any more undefeated black fighters. So since we know that Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade, they're not on the level of a Floyd Mayweather, that means Canelo Alvarez wasn't ready for Mayweather back then, and he's still not ready for Mayweather today because he's not even ready for Demetrius Andrade or Charlo right now. And this is the exact reason why Canelo Alvarez could never be pound for pound the best fighter in the world, at least not moving like that. I tell you guys all the time, if you're pound for pound the best fighter in the world, first of all, you have to believe it. You have to have confidence that you're really the best fighter. You can't be the best fighter in the world, but be saying, you know what, oh, I don't want to fight these fighters because they're too difficult to beat. I mean, guys, just imagine if Terrence Crawford, let's completely reverse the roles and say Terrence Crawford was the black version of Canelo Alvarez, where at the age of 23, he lost to some legendary, undefeated, great Mexican fighter, right? He loses to him, and then he says, you know what, I wasn't ready, you know, and years later, there's other really good undefeated Mexican fighters that are constantly calling out Crawford. In fact, some of them become his mandatory. Instead of Crawford fighting them, he vacates his belt. He avoids them. And he starts to fight nothing but sea-level white European fighters for 3 or 4 years. And then his trainer came out and said, those Mexican fighters are very difficult to beat. And keep in mind, so there's no confusion, it's one thing to say those Mexican fighters are tough. Those are some tough fighters. But being tough is not the same thing as being a difficult challenge. Oscar Valdez is tough. Brandon Rios is tough. But anyway, going back to my point with Terence Crawford, if Terence moved the exact same way Canelo Alvarez is moving and the roles were reversed, what would you guys say about Terence Crawford if he did something like that? We know Terence Crawford would never do that because Terence Crawford is always going after the best competition, which is the reason why he's pound for pound the best fighter in the world. And he will most likely, there's a very good chance that he will be fighting for undisputed in the deepest division in boxing right now, the welterweight division. And he'll be fighting the winner of Spence versus Ugas the end of this year. You know why? Because Terence Crawford is the best fighter in the world, and he believes that he's the best fighter in the world. And the same thing could be said about Errol Spence, especially if he wins that fight. I'll close out with saying this. I have already told you guys, from black fighters to Mexican fighters, you know what they do have in common? The majority of the greatest black and Mexican fighters of all time suffered their first loss to a black fighter. And that is a statistical fact. You can go ahead and look it up on BoxRec right now. I'm not even talking about the second or third losses. So it's a fact that American black fighters have been the most difficult challenges since the inception, since the beginning of the sport. It's always been that way, and Eddie Reynoso is proving that it's still that way. I'm gonna leave you guys with this MBF clip. This is promoter and boxing manager Cameron Duncan talking about Top Rank's matchmaker and how Top Rank taught him how to promote his boxers. This interview was conducted by Barbershop Conversations. Check it out, guys.
Ask Cameron Duncan, do Top Rank have like columns of fighters? And they say, we don't want this guy fighting the black fighter. We don't want this fighter fighting the Mexican fighter, and so on and so forth.
You're going to get into the racial stuff, huh?
No, I'm not. I'm asking.
That's a theory there by the greatest matchmaker, probably, in my opinion, ever. And I'm not going to mention his name either, but you know what I'm talking about. And he used to have a thing up on his board, NBF, no black fighters. And when I was taught to bring up a fighter, you know, and again, it's just, he used to say to me, you can go anywhere in the country, and I'm going to leave it at this. I don't want to go into a long discussion because people are people in God's eyes, and we're all the same. He used to say to me, you can go anywhere into a city in America or anywhere in the world and ask a white guy, and he didn't say any other, he didn't say anything about Hispanic, anything. Ask a white guy to throw a jab, and half of them are going to turn backwards and throw it like a girl and everything. Ask any black man on a street corner in any city in the world, and they will snap out a jab in a heartbeat. And I used to laugh. He said, they're just more physically gifted. And he said, and so they have speed, and better to stay away from them. Nothing personal. So I said, okay. And I've lived by that. And, you know, I don't want to sound like some weird guy, but, you know, you're trying to be safe with your guys. And so, yeah, there is a thing about that, you know, but not in a bad way, in a very respectful way, you know, to be careful. So that's all.
All right, now check this out, guys. If you're looking to repair eczema scars, burns and bruises, dark spots and blemishes, then this right here is the perfect product for you guys. It's called Elo Diki Face and Body Oil. Athletes and top-ranking boxers, they're also using it after training to reduce swelling, inflammation, and to ease the pain. So get yours today. Go to elodiki.com, like them on Facebook, and follow them on Instagram. Fellas, I've got some great news for you. If you've lost your hair or have a receding hairline, the time has come when you can finally get your hairline back through a process called scalp micropigmentation. So here's how it works. It's a hair tattoo that replicates the look of your hair follicles when you have fully shaved it down. So to get this hookup, make sure you follow and contact my man Scalp Carolinas on Instagram.